I come in front of you today to talk about one of the most massive cover-ups of all times. I want to tell you that I did not come by this information that I am about to present in any rational way at first. Many years ago, I had a dream one night that completely changed the direction of my life. I wrote about this dream and the story of what happened to me in my first book called The Awakening of Red Feather. This book tells about a very magical and mystical journey I was on for over 10 years and how I came to be interested in space science. As a result of that experience, I have spent the last 10 years researching archaeology, astronomy, astrology, geology, mythology, and both the Russian and American space science planetary discoveries. It seems that NASA, which is secretly controlled by the U.S. military, has conveniently forgotten to tell us about a few things that they have discovered in our solar system, about beings who exist on planets nearby who are far more advanced than us and who have been trying to give our world free energy technology. NASA has failed to tell us about ruins in ancient cities on Mars, about thriving civilizations on Venus, or about mining and UFO construction on the moon, something that they have positively known about for over 40 years, ever since the world's leading astronomers had perfected their telescopes enough to examine the moon in detail. In this video, I will talk about this information, presenting facts and photographs. I will also talk about how all of this information relates to the plight of human beings here on Earth with the rapid increases in planetary and atmospheric destruction. As I will conclude, humans have been entrusted with this planet. Our souls are eternal, and if we don't learn how to become good stewards of the planet here and now, we will have to start all over again somewhere else. It was there, on the Hopi Reservation, that I learned about the purpose of extraterrestrial, highly advanced beings that are monitoring humanity from the skies and who have been living on other planets in the solar system since the beginning of human history. It was there, in the deserts of the great American Southwest, that I learned about the open-air uranium mining that is being done on Native American reservation land, which is of grave concern to the extraterrestrials. The Native Americans have very important spiritual philosophies about planetary destruction. Uranium mining is very dangerous, not only because of the resulting technological creation of deadly plutonium, but because of the damage done to the planet's electromagnetic grid. The forces that are monitoring our planet have created colonies on our moon. They come from Venus and other planets. One of these days, humanity will awaken and realize that there are many levels of reality, many levels of being in this universe other than the material. If we look for life with the material rational senses we process through at this stage of our evolution, we may not find more than a few signs of life in our solar system, but as we awaken to higher consciousness, we will realize that these other realities have been right here alongside of us all the time. And what follows is a glimpse into these other realities. How many people would believe that there is life on the moon? And furthermore, how many people would believe the following information about the moon, now known to many space science researchers to be factual? The moon has a much higher gravity than we have been led to believe. New estimates are more than 60% of the Earth's gravity. The moon has an atmosphere, possibly 6 pounds per square inch at lower elevations. The moon has evidence of water and some vegetation, and there is a semi-fertile temperate zone on the far side. The moon has been and is occupied by aliens or some sort of space people. There are bases all over both sides of the moon, and this has been photographed and verified by both the Russian and U.S. space program. While these assertions may seem astounding, far-fetched, and absurd, most people have overlooked some very important developments in lunar research over the past 30 years. What happened to the Russian lunar space program? Remember, both the U.S. and Russia wanted a base on the moon, but why did Russia abruptly cancel their whole moon race in 1968? Interestingly enough, they scrapped a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure and eventually put their lunar landers and modules into museums. This abrupt end came only weeks after a major unmanned mission to the moon in 1968. This unmanned Russian spacecraft returned its high-resolution films directly to Earth, unlike NASA's radio-transmitted pictures. After Russian space scientists developed their films, they went into a deep, secretive period about their whole moon program. While there has been some speculation and some evidence to suggest that the Russians did go to the moon secretly, the truth is they saw something in those early high-resolution pictures which caused them to radically alter their space science program. The same pattern later showed up in the American space program. Actually, the alien cover-up began in the U.S. many decades ago and became official in 1960 when NASA and the U.S. government commissioned the Brookings Institute to do an official report. The Brookings Report commissioned by NASA in 1959 and conducted jointly by NASA and the prestigious Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C., had a broad and far-reaching impact on NASA's future plans for revealing space science findings to the American public. Remember, NASA's original charter mandated widespread and appropriate dissemination or publication of any space science findings. In other words, NASA was originally founded on the principles of honesty and truth. It is now known that NASA had already begun to find evidence of alien life in our solar system by 1959, and that's why they commissioned the Brookings Institute in the first place. NASA asked the Institute what would happen to the American society if they were told that aliens or alien artifacts were found on other planets in our solar system. The report concluded, and I quote, "Anthropological files contain many examples of societies which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies espousing different ideas. It was recommended that the American public not be told of any such possible discoveries." Remember, few people really know anything about the moon except what was presented to us by NASA during the short duration of the Apollo missions. The astronauts only explored a few miles of the lunar surface in equatorial areas that were already known by NASA to be desolate and barren, much like the Earth's Sahara Desert. This is one of NASA's favorite tricks. We will find the same pattern later in the Mars research. Photographic information sent back by unmanned orbiters have always provided NASA with specific landing sites far away from any potentially controversial evidence of biological or alien activity. But fortunately, there is another source of lunar evidence that has been almost virtually suppressed by certain political forces. This evidence is more than 100 years of telescopic records made by some of the world's leading astronomers. From this evidence came proof of cyclic changes on the moon, atmospheric phenomena, mining and construction, blinking and glowing lights, low-flying lunar objects, vegetation color changes in many craters, and the sudden appearance of domes and structures. During the 50s, much of this independent information recorded by some of the world's leading astronomers was beginning to get published, and there was a rash of books as well as a growing public interest. The government then took notice and began secret observations of the moon from Palomar and a few other large observatories. A few of these noted astronomers were Dr. H.P. Wilkins, John J. O'Neill, the late Harvard professor W.H. Pickering, V.A. Fursoff, M.J. Jessup, and Patrick Moore, the great British astronomer. Just what did these astronomers find, and how did the government react? John O'Neill, the noted Pulitzer Prize science writer of the early 50s, made some startling discoveries on the night of July 29, 1953. In the northern region of the Mare Crisium area, spanning two prominent ridges, was a straight 12-mile-long bridge. Not only did it cast a shadow, but sunlight could be seen streaming in beneath it. Shortly after he announced his discovery, two top British astronomers, Dr. Wilkins and Patrick Moore, confirmed the bridge's existence. During the years leading up to this discovery, other astronomers had recorded lights and other strange activity in the exact same area. Astronomers working back here in the U.S. at Mount Palomar confirmed the bridge as well, and a spectrographic analysis proved that it was a metallic structure. Well, this was about the time the government started to get interested in the moon. The years that followed saw the Pentagon and its agencies begin to clamp down on the evidence for strange lunar activity, increasingly being found by astronomers using larger and ever more powerful telescopes. All of this new evidence dramatically coincided with the increased UFO activity in the Earth's skies. Did the government confirm what the world's leading astronomers were confirming, that there was UFO activity on the moon? This is exactly what happened. Two very well-respected and competent astronomers published definitive documents and books on the moon just prior to the space age. These books are very important to understand what was happening in the worldwide community of astronomers, as well as the new governmental policies of denial and deception that were beginning to form. Before we talk about these important publications, it would be worth mentioning that NASA's prime mission in the early 1960s was to get a man in space, but the government considered it top priority not to reveal the truth about space that so many other astronomers were confirming, and not just what they were finding on the moon. The space agency is controlled by the government, and NASA had to follow orders. The moon actually has a dynamic and interesting environment. The lunar day is 14 Earth days long. The sun rises very slowly at the lunar dawn and stays above the horizon for 14 days. We can see this effect as the moon comes into its full stage as seen from Earth. However, during our full moon, the backside of the moon is in its long lunar night. During our new moon, the far side of the moon is in its full lunar day. The moon does not rotate on its axis. The long lunar days and nights are a result of the fact that one side of the moon is locked towards the Earth, while the far side is locked away from our view. Only the lunar orbiters and astronauts have seen the far side of the moon in full daylight. A few color pictures of the moon's far side were released by NASA from the Apollo 8 orbiter, but they were soon retracted and all future pictures were gray-toned and altered. The vegetation color changes and evidence for water in the Apollo 8 pictures was dramatic, as you can see from these NASA photos. Apparently, there are plants on the moon that can sprout, mature, and die all within the 14-day lunar day cycle. This phenomenon has been witnessed by astronomers for over 150 years. The most disturbing fact about the NASA lunar information is that out of hundreds of thousands of lunar farside photographs, only a handful have been made public. Top scientists to publish books about the moon in 1957 and 1959 were M.K. Jessup and V.A. Fursoff. M.K. Jessup's book, The Expanding Case for the UFO, was published in 1957. Prior to building the largest telescope and observatory in the southern hemisphere in South Africa, Jessup taught astronomy and mathematics at the University of Michigan. Jessup left the United States to build his large observatory because he recognized the early warning signs of the U.S. government space science cover-up. V.A. Fursoff was the most respected authority on the moon in the world at that time. He published in 1959 the book Strange World of the Moon and presented uncontradictable evidence of a lunar atmosphere, regional water, vegetation, mist and clouds, and fogs over many craters. According to both Jessup and Fursoff, the many startling changes in the crater plateau alone provided enough evidence for life and UFO activity on the moon. Fogs and clouds were seen often spreading across the crater at lunar sunrise, and as far back as 1887, observers in the U.S., Great Britain, and France watched as groups of glowing, self-illuminating objects moved about inside the crater. Groups of lights have been seen moving towards plateau from other areas of the moon and then forming geometric patterns inside the crater. Fursoff made several hundred observations over a period of 3 years and found considerable color changes inside craters, various shades of brown, rust, and green tints. The 2-week cycle always begins with the gray olive green in the lunar morning, later becoming a bright green, followed by yellowish to rust in the lunar evening. Blues, violets, and reds have also been reported to suggest large patches of flowering plants. According to both these scientists, there could be no other explanation for all these cyclic color changes other than biological activity. Unlike Fursoff, Jessup was more interested in the physical changes on the moon and in the intense UFO activity that had been seen by many other astronomers and selenographers leading up to the 50s. A selenographer is somebody who studies the moon through a telescope for years. Apparent changes along the interior walls of craters and ridges seem to indicate mining activities. Parallel ramparts and geometric walls suggested mammoth construction at work from time to time. There are many records of luminous objects traveling in groups moving great distances across the moon toward very brightly illuminated areas of fixed lights. These sightings go back to the 1860s, when astronomers were just beginning to perfect their telescopes. In 1870, the Royal Astronomical Society of Great Britain charted over 1,600 observations of strange lights in the Mare Crisium area alone. The amazing footnote to this is that the lights were seen concentrated in a certain area of the Mare Crisium, the same place where the giant bridge was later discovered by John J. O'Neill and Dr. H.P. Wilkins. Later, it was confirmed that the mysterious bridge had suddenly disappeared and may have not been a bridge at all. Astronomers had in fact witnessed the construction of a 12-mile-long UFO and possibly a mothership. In the 50s, as telescopic lunar observations were becoming more common, astronomers repeatedly witnessed both dark and glowing spheres move around from place to place on the moon with estimated speeds up to 6,000 miles per hour. These objects were seen both leaving and returning to the moon as well. Is it possible that NASA did not see any of these things when they went to the moon? You can bet that they saw everything, but what would NASA have us believe? That 150 years of telescopic evidence suddenly vanished from the face of the moon? NASA was fully aware of the controversial areas of the moon and carefully planned each Apollo mission to set down at least 100 miles from any of those areas. They set down in areas known to be barren plains and ancient lava beds. They were very careful to stay away from the many craters where signs of both biological and artificial activity had been recorded. Remember, live pictures from the moon were not so live. There was at least an 8-second time delay, and only a select few saw the raw data coming in before it flashed on the controller screens and eventually across world television. Did you ever wonder why, in a world so fixated with color, that we only saw gray-tone, black and white drab pictures of the moon from most all of the Apollo missions? Is that what it is really like there up on the moon, gray and colorless? It's a funny thing that every other picture released of planets and their moons during that time were in color. Well, it turns out that NASA has purposely gray-toned almost every picture from the moon to convince the public that the moon is a boring and dead place. And they did a good job. They had us believe that the moon was not even worth going back to, and we all became disinterested in the whole lunar program. The public and orthodox scientists were put to sleep with a small number of low-resolution gray-tone pictures that showed nothing but a vast wasteland. Well, if an alien dropped a lander on this planet in the Sahara Desert, they would see nothing but a wasteland as well. Fortunately, a few color pictures of the moon were released by NASA before the gray toning began. Remember also that all of the astronauts were military pilots, well trained, and the Apollo program was a governmental project. But despite the policy not to breach national security, many conversations between astronauts and mission control were recorded and later published in several magazines and books. The astronauts were under constant surveillance by UFOs, and they witnessed firsthand the true nature of the moon and its strange inhabitants. Neil Armstrong issued a challenge to the government and other Apollo astronauts in the summer of 1995 at the White House. He said that the breakthroughs for humanity will come for those who can remove truth's protective covers. The question is, who will have the courage to speak first? Lies lead to deeper lies and credibility issues. An example of these credibility issues is the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission. We all know the official story. Apollo 13 was the fifth manned mission to the moon, the third scheduled to land on the lunar surface. We were told that Apollo 13's emergency return to Earth was due to a mysterious explosion in one of its oxygen tanks. But there was a lot of speculation within the space agency to what really happened. According to Maurice Chatelain, the former NASA engineer who was in charge of designing all the communication and television systems for the whole Apollo program, and who wrote a book that was published by Doubleday in 1977 called Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space, Apollo 13 was carrying a secret nuclear payload that was to be detonated on the moon after the astronauts left. The nuclear test was going to be measured by seismographic packages left on the lunar surface from previous Apollo landing sites. NASA was trying to determine the actual geological infrastructure of the moon. What a stupid idea. And according to Maurice, a UFO trailed the Apollo 13 shortly into its flight and caused the explosion in the oxygen tank. If in fact there was some form of extraterrestrial civilization living or working on the moon, they would surely be advanced enough to detect a nuclear payload launched towards them. Why was NASA so concerned with the infrastructure of the moon? It is now known in the unorthodox scientific community that all the Apollo missions cited UFOs and artificial structures on the moon. Many of the photographs revealed here today have been reproduced from NASA's Goddard Space Data Science Center near Washington, D.C. Early in 1971, some of NASA's very sensitive instruments left on the moon detected water vapor erupting from cracks in the lunar surface. Seismometers in two separate areas were registering tremors and moonquakes, when other meters at both these sites detected large water vapor clouds on several occasions. These instruments were 100 miles apart, where both were detecting the same vapor cloud. John Freeman and H. Dent Hills of Rice University issued a report on March 7, 1971, stating that these vapor clouds were covering 100 square miles and that they were 99% water. NASA was caught off guard and later issued a statement that the water vapor clouds were likely the contents of a ruptured urine bag left by the astronauts. Again, many of the early Apollo 8 photographs were in color, and they showed the bright rim of the moon, which can only be produced by an atmosphere. NASA quickly adjusted their image-enhancing techniques, and all later photos were released as gray tones. William Bryant, author of Moongate, Suppressed Findings of the U.S. Space Program, brought to light the Apollo 14 flag incident, which is known by many space science researchers. While an on-site television camera was running, a gust of wind kicked up, causing the newly set flag to flap and wave. After the astronauts saw that the flag was flapping around in the wind, they both ran to block the camera's view. Brian actually obtained a copy of the film and analyzed it closely. NASA never said a word about the incident, and the whole thing was conveniently forgotten. From then on, NASA made sure that all U.S. flags were stiffly starched. NASA was working very hard to show the public an airless moon, but the real evidence was quite different. First off, one of the leading experts on the moon pointed out that during the landing of the Apollo 12, the dust raised by the retro rockets took several minutes to settle. This should not be the case in an airless vacuum. The dust would settle in seconds. And then there's the evidence of the early U.S. and Russian rocket probes that hit the moon at thousands of miles per hour, causing huge dust clouds to rise many miles high. How could dust rise to such heights if not for some kind of substantial atmosphere? In the past decade, most people have not given the moon a passing thought. NASA and the governments of the world were very successful in their policies of deception, but yet the moon has and continues to show both biological and UFO activity. And in recent years, the UFO activity and mining on the moon has increased dramatically. One of the most controversial NASA cover-ups has been highlighted in the official Apollo 10 NASA catalog. It turns out that 75% of the photographs in the catalog are either overexposed, underexposed, or just black inserts. But when astronomers and researchers ordered the original frames from the Goddard Space Science Center in Washington, D.C., they in fact received the original unaltered frames, a major slip by NASA. In particular is frame number AS-10-324822. According to NASA, this frame should not exist, but yet suddenly it now does. Researchers noted something strange about this frame immediately. There seemed to be some kind of large grid-like structure blocking the sunlight from lighting a large portion of the lunar landscape. As researchers begin to enhance and enlarge areas of this frame with the help of advanced computer technology, it became clear why NASA did not want this picture in the Apollo 10 catalog. As you can see, some type of dark, grid-like structure rises above the lunar surface to great heights, and there are giant glass-like objects hanging from the cables at miles above the lunar surface. What are these objects hanging on the cables? Are they solar collectors or communication relays? In this frame, taken from the unmanned Surveyor 6 on November 24, 1967, a dome structure of some sort can clearly be seen. This astonishing photo reveals bead-like light scattering from a highly geometric dome structure. The construction and materials of this structure are verified by many Apollo 10 photographs taken 100 miles northeast in the same sinus media region of the moon. A closer enhancement of this Surveyor photo reveals the possibility of some kind of energy, light, and activity going on inside the dome. This is not surprising when we look back at all the construction activity that early astronomers were seeing on the moon with their 200-inch telescopes. Even more incredible is this Apollo photograph number AS-12-51-7552, taken by the Apollo 12 orbiter while the Apollo lander was on the lunar surface. What is wrong with this picture? Obviously, something created a dust path as it passed over the lunar surface into this crater hole. But take a closer look. If in fact something had impacted the lunar surface and created a trail in the soil that could be visible 6 miles above the lunar surface, then why is the plow mound or impact mound on the front side of this crater? If something had impacted the moon creating this crater, the plow mound or impact mound would be on the back side of the crater in relationship to the dust trails. By all indication, something is exiting the moon from this location, and by the looks of this photo, it is exiting and re-entering the moon on a regular basis. Fortunately, another frame from Apollo 10, taken in the same area as this mysterious crater, shows just what that something is. Here in frame number AS-10-33-4904, in the Sea of Fertility, is an object coming directly out of the moon. Estimates of its size are about 12 miles long. The object at the top of this frame was moving so fast that its movement was caught all in the same frame. Thanks to Kenichi Kano, a Japanese researcher who spent thousands of hours looking through NASA's archives, This photograph was found and is now being revealed in publications around the world. There is mining activity all over the moon from time to time. There are hundreds and hundreds of NASA frames that show mining activities. As you can see from this frame, there is a square hole at the bottom of this crater. What kind of asteroid makes square holes? A closer look reveals a serious mining project underway. What about this photo? How can such craters be explained? And what about these perfect dish-shaped craters that are all over the moon? They look as if something swirled them into perfectly smooth bowls. This Apollo frame shows some kind of giant craft hovering right above the surface. It's as big as the craters below it. Is it possible that advanced mining UFOs can hover over the lunar surface and direct magnetic energy blasts into the lunar soil, which extract the fuel and metals they need without ever landing? Something like the energy that creates crop circles? This is the theory that I have come to hold as the most likely cause of these very exact circular and dish-shaped craters. Other NASA frames reveal strange mining activities and machines at work. This frame shows some sort of machine shooting soil out of the crater as it progresses around the dish-shaped hole it's creating. Other frames show tracks and trails all over the moon, left from some sort of giant machines. In this particular frame, there is a large machine moving across the lunar surface, leaving massive tracks. NASA officially calls these tracks rolling rocks. But a closer look reveals that this machine is monstrous. The photograph was taken about 10 miles above the lunar surface, and the shadow being cast by the machine reveals a moving structure that is 80 to 100 stories tall. A closer examination of the tracks show that this machine is stopping every once in a while and taking samples. It moves forward and digs, slowly but methodically. Tracks like these can be found in other areas of the moon as well. One of the most complete testimonies about the Apollo missions can be found in Daniel Ross's book, UFOs and the Complete Evidence from Space. Quoting from his book, NASA discovered what was on the far side of the moon as well as what was on the front side, but they could not reveal or even hint at life beyond the Earth. They had to fabricate moon data and suppress the truth. The whole space program was really a military operation from the start, not in the sense of conquering the moon, but by advancing our military technology to the point of ruling the Earth. Before Apollo 8 went to the moon in 1968, the U.S. had already launched 450 orbiting satellites around the Earth, and 340 of them had military purposes. The Soviet Union was doing the same. The public relations image of the moon adventure was necessary to prop up public support for the space program, but it was not designed to deliver the truth. NASA's complicity in denying the reality of the moon was forced by the economic interests which internationally control governments. The truth is that space visitors and the people on the moon live in peace. Should our governments reveal this, they would also have to inform the public about the propulsion systems of the UFOs. The spacecraft utilize natural electromagnetic energy that exists in space and in the atmosphere around most all planets. By using this free energy, any community could supply all the heat, electricity, and transportation needs of its population without the services of the fuel and electric companies. That is why the truth about UFOs and the moon has to be suppressed. The authorities fear that this information would ruin the stock market, leading to an economic collapse. There is a large body of evidence to suggest that both the U.S. and Russia continue to go to the moon secretly, and many space science researchers have solid evidence that the government has been actually working at secret bases on the moon with aliens. It is possible that many of our most incredible technological advances have actually come from direct contact with these advanced beings. Many people in the space science fields have heard about George Adamski. He was a very interesting and controversial man, to say the least. In 1955, he co-authored a book called Flying Saucers Have Landed. In this book, he published photographs of UFOs that supposedly were visiting him from Venus. He asserted that one of these flying ships landed near him and that he was invited aboard by very tall and beautiful humanoid beings. He was then given a tour of the Moon, Mars, and Venus. Adamski was considered by many to be a very honest and credible man. He came forward with his story at a time when UFO activity around the planet was reaching epidemic proportions and when the U.S. government was preparing to launch a more aggressive phase of its massive space science cover-up. Now, the interesting thing about his photographs is that experts have never discredited them. Detailed studies of Adamski's photos revealed very important facts about electromagnetic propulsion systems. Adamski said that he was taken to Venus and shown a very advanced civilization, one that lived in peace and harmony, using the free electromagnetic energy around planets and in space for all their energy needs. In light of this information on Venus that I am about to present, this is a very interesting claim. Adamski also asserted that he was taken to the moon and shown many mining operations and lunar bases. He said he was shown the backside of the moon as well, and that the ship he was on dropped for a close enough look for him to see water, some agriculture, and many workstations of alien beings. The research that I have done regarding the real lunar findings has convinced me that Adamski was in fact telling the truth. He was taken to the moon. And he was also taken to Mars. Most everything that he saw on Mars has now been confirmed. A planet in slow recovery from war and environmental destruction, a subject I will talk about in length late in this video. I am even convinced that UFOs or spacecrafts that Adamski photographed were early models of electromagnetic flying machines constructed on Venus. If you study the thousands of UFO photographs taken in our skies over the past 40 years, you can see that these particular UFOs have been evolving and getting more streamlined each decade, much like our automobile industry. Could it be that Venus is a parallel world to Earth, a parallel civilization? Could it be that Venetian civilization went down a different road of technology, the Tesla road of free energy and electromagnetics, and not the road of burning fossil fuels? Today, over the skies of Mexico, there are thousands of these advanced Venetian crafts. This is very interesting when one looks at the Mayan prophecies. According to Mayan legends, the Mayan god Quetzalcoatl left the Earth for Venus to create a new civilization because Earth humans had become too corrupt. In any case, all of the assertions made by George Adamski have turned out to be very accurate. There have been many other attempts by peaceful Venetians to contact and help humanity as well, but our government has made it a special business to discredit and cover up the truth. How many secret probes have explored Venus since 1975? Some reliable estimates are that over a dozen Venus probes have been executed by NASA in the past 20 years, one of being the Cassini, which has been circling Venus late in 1998 and early in 1999. Before heading to Saturn via the Earth's gravity bounce. The Cassini is the controversial planetary probe that is carrying 72 pounds of plutonium. Why is it that NASA, with all space science technology they have for exploring planets, will not even talk about Venus? It's as if Venus is a taboo subject. I am now convinced that NASA and the people who are really controlling this world know full well that there is an advanced human race living on the surface of Venus, and that their spiritual economic systems, if ever shared with Earthlings, would put an end to our systems of greed and exploitation, domination and control. I am also convinced that most of the military technology being developed by our government today is not so much for fighting wars on this planet. It is being created to shoot down alien craft coming in to help bring free energy technology and peace to this planet before we destroy ourselves. It has happened before. What do you really think happened at Roswell? Do you really think that all these advanced spacecraft crashed on their own? No, not at all. Our space brothers and sisters were very concerned with all the nuclear testing we were doing at White Sands. They had come to monitor this testing and perhaps contact us about the dangers. These UFOs were deliberately shot down. One more thing I want to mention about George Adamski is that he talked a lot about a mothership that he was taking aboard where he had extensive conversations with the people from Venus. This mothership was described by Adamski to be about 12 miles long. I find this fact very interesting, considering that the Apollo mission did in fact, as we have found, photograph flying objects leaving the moon that were about 12 miles long. By the early 60s, and with increasing reports of UFOs in our skies, many researchers were talking about the idea that Venus might have a habitable environment. Venus is more or less the twin planet of Earth, both about the same size and both with atmospheric clouds. We have been told that because Venus is closer to the Sun, it is much hotter, and NASA has said that the surface of Venus is too hot for any kind of life. But in November of 1959, scientists working for the U.S. Navy and Johns Hopkins University were successful in sending up a stratosphere balloon to an altitude of 16 miles in order to study Venus. Very careful and accurate infrared readings were done on the Venusian clouds, showing 5 times more water vapor above its clouds than over the clouds of Earth. In 1960, both American and Soviet scientists did a spectrographic study of Venus's atmosphere and found the presence of both nitrogen and atomic oxygen. Now, the finding of atomic oxygen is a very important matter. The Earth has the same atomic oxygen in its upper atmosphere, and research has shown that atomic oxygen can only be present from one basic process of normal oxygen becoming disassociated by shortwave solar radiation into atomic oxygen. Space science experts all over the world became excited, and V.A. Fershoff was one of the first to remark that a planetary atmosphere could not retain such an active element of oxygen unless it was constantly supplied by some source, such as photosynthesis in green plants. Fershoff also reasoned that the amount of oxygen needed below the clouds of Venus to support the amount of atomic oxygen in its upper atmosphere was larger than the amount of oxygen on Earth, and that this finding alone constituted the evidence of life on Venus. But remember, the government was already beginning to censor and pressure Fershoff and other leading space scientists into silence over the truth about the moon. NASA has consistently reported that the temperature readings of the atmosphere of Venus are so hot that life could not exist. But let's take a look at the real NASA data. It has been shown by some of the most expert planetary scientists in the world that NASA's atmospheric measurements of Venus came from its uppermost atmosphere, and that they were actually measuring kinetic energy bands that are now known to be common on all planets, with even the slightest atmosphere. Late in the 60s and early 70s, the same measurements were taken on the Earth's other upper atmosphere and kinetic bands. At 100 miles altitude, the temperature was found to be 700 degrees. At 150 miles, the temperature was 1260 degrees. It turns out that upper atmospheric readings have nothing to do with surface temperatures, but yet the standard textbooks on Venus had already been written. Back in 1956, while studying the normal planetary radio wave transmissions from Venus in order to determine the length of the Venusian day, Dr. John D. Krause of Ohio State University detected other radio signals originating from Venus. Because of their uniform pattern and amplitude modulation, they completely resembled radio waves broadcasted from earthly radio transmitting stations. This was such an amazing discovery for Dr. Krause that he conducted many more observations in order to confirm these signals. Remember, Dr. Krause was one of the nation's leading radio astronomers in 1956. It turns out that 3 scientists working for the U.S. Naval Research Lab also announced that they had been picking up the same signals. The news of this discovery was quickly picked up by the Associated Press, but after the AP story, Dr. Krause was paid a visit by government agents and never spoke or wrote another word about his findings. Within the scientific community, there had been a very heated debate over the false and contradictory information that NASA was revealing from its Mariner probes, but this all changed when Russia successfully soft-landed Venera 9 and Venera 10 in June of 1975. These probes landed 1,350 miles apart, and both probes functioned well and transmitted pictures back to Earth for about an hour. From both probes came pictures of a landscape that was bathed in sunlight. This was quite a shock for American Orthodox scientists who had already formed their opinions about Venus along the false data lines designed by NASA. In that short hour, the Venera probes also confirmed young rocks and geological features much like Earth's, as well as similar mineral composition of life-supporting soil. In 1978, NASA finally managed to get 2 major probes to Venus called Pioneer 1 and Pioneer 2. Lacking the soft landing technology of the Russians, these probes had 2 main functions. Pioneer 1 was an orbiter. Pioneer 2 was a transport bus because it carried descent probes that were set to crash, land on the surface, but take readings during the descents. Pioneer 1 was placed in an orbital path to study the region known as Beta, where the first Soviet Venera probes had landed. Picture after picture confirmed constantly changing and rotating broken cloud cover. Pioneer 1 actually recorded a volcanic eruption in the Beta region that had an explosive force greater than the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and for years scientists were able to monitor the levels of sulfur dioxide over the atmospheric region steadily decline. Sonar mapping by Pioneer 1 showed planetary features strikingly similar to those of Earth and Mars. From this point on, both the U.S. and Russia began to perfect their Venus probes and landers, but little or nothing has ever been released from later Pioneer or Venera missions, even though the advanced technology of these probes and the photographic capability was well known to space scientists. Venera 11 and 12 both were known to have functioned and transmitted pictures back for hours, but Russia has never released any of this data. As with the case of the Moon, astronomers were seeing many strange and unusual abnormalities and changes on Mars as well. Many of the world's largest observatories were detecting radio waves, moving lights, clouds, and seasonal changes. Although the length of the Martian year is nearly double that of Earth's, the seasons on Mars alternate and change like they do on Earth. The Martian day is 24 hours and 37 minutes, and the inclination of its axis is 25 degrees. Ultraviolet photographs of Mars taken from telescopes showed a dense atmosphere as early as 1926, contrary to what we are still told by orthodox scientists today. The Martian atmosphere is not as dense as Earth's, but it is dense enough to sustain clouds, water vapor, shrinking and expanding polar ice caps, occasional water erosion, and etc. All of these atmospheric effects have been documented on Mars for almost a century. The presence of vegetation on Mars was fiercely debated in the early part of this century, but most all planetary experts knew that the debate would end once and for all if certain elements could be shown to exist in the Martian atmosphere. These elements are carbon dioxide, oxygen, and water. Even the most conservative scientists agreed that carbon dioxide was present in the Martian atmosphere in abundance. As far as the existence of water, the Viking 1 orbiter photographed extensive ground fogs, mists, and cloud cover in the northern hemisphere. And instruments aboard the Viking 1 lander proved conclusively that the polar ice caps were indeed frozen water. So we have water and carbon dioxide. Let's put this into perspective with the basic life process scientists call photosynthesis. Remember, there can be no oxygen without plants and photosynthesis. Plants that contain chlorophyll use the energy of sunlight to synthesize carbohydrates from carbon dioxide and water. 6 molecules of water and 6 molecules of carbon dioxide are transformed with the aid of solar energy into 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen, which is the basic air and food building blocks of all living mammals. Mammals breathe in the oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. This is nature's perfect cycle. The most plausible theory about Mars in the scientific communities today is that this perfect cycle of oxygen production was disrupted or changed dramatically in the not-too-distant Martian past, which has left the planet largely dormant. But studies have shown that there is still a relatively small level of oxygen present in the Martian atmosphere, and thus a certain amount of photosynthesis must be occurring. It is interesting to note that humanity is drastically disrupting the perfect cycle of oxygen versus carbon dioxide by 2 basic destructive practices. On the one hand, we are destroying the plants that transform the carbon dioxide back into oxygen, and on the other hand, we are pumping more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels. Could something of this sort have happened on Mars? If any evidence of ancient civilizations could be found on Mars, it surely would support such a theory. Just such evidence has been found, and that is why NASA is withholding from the public 99% of their recent Mars photos. Even the Martian Pathfinder that recently landed on Mars made some startling discoveries. Of course, in keeping with the subversive policies of the past, NASA has once again blacked out information and released only doctored up and highly censored photographs from that mission. According to John Kettler, a writer and researcher who investigated the NASA-released information about the Martian Pathfinder, NASA had good reason to alter and change the Pathfinder photographs and to eventually withhold them completely from the public and scientific community. Kettler has recently reported that Richard Hoagland and other digital photography experts found out that the Pathfinder actually overshot its scheduled landing site by 40 miles and landed right smack in the middle of an ancient alien military debris field. Much of the debris was scattered and in small pieces, barely recognizable without the aid of advanced computer enhancing techniques. They found what appeared to be gun emplacements, shattered artillery, blown-out vehicles that resembled World War I and World War II German tanks, and small missile warheads lying around in the rocks and sand. NASA was quick to respond to these revealing photographs by deliberately reprocessing the digital images received from the Pathfinder. Hoagland and others have produced extensive evidence of image tampering, including digital wallpapering to hide important areas, image cloning, image splitting, image removal, and in one case leaving a pronounced gap in the horizon showing sloppy digital tampering. NASA has done this sort of thing before, still will not commit to photographing some of the controversial areas like the Sidonian region, where a massive stone face and pyramidal ruins are said to exist. Let me go back for a moment to the early information about Mars. In 1965, NASA and the U.S. government wanted to end the debate about the climate and possible other conditions of past or present life on the planet. The findings of Mariner 4 were totally fabricated and false, and this is where the real obvious contradictions in the Martian space program began. By the time Mariner 9 reached the planet in the early 70s, it became more evident to planetary scientists that NASA and the government had committed to a full-scale Martian cover-up. We would be shown a dead and lifeless planet at all cost. They would do this by releasing red-toned images of a barren wasteland, and any Martian landers that the public would be aware of would be set down in the most desolate areas of the planet. Still, contradictions continue to persist, despite all NASA's efforts to deceive both the public and the independent scientific community. Mariner 9 reached Mars in November of 1971, and NASA said that it could not begin photographing the planet until the spring of 1972 because of a giant dust storm whipping around the planet with winds of 200 miles per hour. This is where some of the real serious contradictions start. On the one hand, NASA claims that there is an extremely rare atmosphere on the Martian surface, about 1% of the atmosphere on Earth, but wind is a movement of air. And if there is virtually no air, what was whipping the dust around at 200 miles per hour? And this is the policy that was designated for the most important space mission ever launched beyond the moon, the 1976 Mars Viking mission. On July 20th, 1976, Viking Lander 1 set down on Mars at 22 north latitude in a region known as Cris Planitia, which is level for Latin plain. Viking Lander 2 set down on the surface September 3rd in a more northerly location at 48 degrees north latitude in a low-lying plain called Utopia. Being nearer the Martian ice cap, the Utopia plains were expected to have a higher concentration of water in the soil for life-testing equipment that had been expertly built into both of the landers. Both landers had been released from orbiters, which gave NASA 4 operating probes to study Mars until they ran out of fuel. Both the orbiters and landers kept functioning well into the early 80s, with the Lander 1 finally shutting down on November 13, 1982. In the book Mars, the Living Planet, Dr. Gilbert V. Levine and Patricia Ann Stroud have revealed what their life-detecting instruments actually did find, and they have revealed a lot of information about how NASA actually discredited all the information being relayed back to the planetary scientists, as well as how NASA was tweaking up and color-altering both the lander and orbiter photographs so that the American public would not see the real pictures of Mars that were shockingly much like Earth. The Viking landers contain 3 life-detecting experiments which were designed to test and retest over and over for as long as the equipment would function. The GEX gas exchange experiment, the PR pyrolytic release experiment, and the LR, the label release experiment. Mars was found to be a world filled with water vapor, liquid water, clouds, mist, fogs, volcanoes, and a carbon dioxide-rich atmosphere that could only be explained by a long chain of life activity on Mars for hundreds of thousands of years. Something dramatic happened on Mars, and as the evidence is continuing to reveal year after year, Mars was once inhabited by a very advanced but perhaps destructive and violent race of beings. I would like to discuss for a moment a little of the mythological information about Mars handed down to us from the ancients. Quoting from Mars, the Living Planet, on page 23, it is interesting to note that Mars was known to other cultures a world away from each other by similar concepts. For the Chinese, Mars was Yang Ho, the fire planet. To the Aztec and the American Indian tribes, Mars was Huitzilopochtli, destroyer of towns and killer of people. Of course, Ares, the Martian god, was from the planet of vengeance to the Greeks, which the Romans took as their deity and god of war, and built an entire empire around the red planet. Mars was worshipped second only to Jupiter, king of all Roman gods. All of the mythological information becomes more and more relevant as the true scientific information about the red planet comes to light. Turning back to Dr. Levine and Dr. Strauss, it turned out that their label release experiment was the most successful, and they were able to detect all kinds of life activities going on in the Martian soil. The photographs coming from the Hubble telescope are confirming that major environmental changes are taking place on Mars. Hubble photo number STSCL-PRC95-17b, entitled Springtime on Mars, was taken February 25, 1995. It clearly shows white and blue sky clouds with hazes, a brilliant polar ice cap, orange deserts, and many dark green areas. Later Hubble photos reveal the green areas changing to golden brown in conjunction with a growing ice cap. The Viking instruments confirmed that temperatures of a Martian summer can reach 98 degrees Fahrenheit and stay that way for hours during the daylight. I want to quote something else from Mars, the living planet. The author was quoting Jury J. Van de Woon and Ron J. Wichelman, who worked on the Viking image formatting and processing at JPL. Mr. Van de Woon recalls, "Both Ron and I were responsible for the color quality control of the Viking lander photographs, and Dr. Thomas Mulch, the Viking team leader, told us that he got a call from a NASA administrator asking that we destroy the Mars blue sky negative created from the digital data. They were then asked to tweak the colors of the digital photographs to enhance the reds." The quote continues, "Also, NASA did not want to release a photograph to the press showing the American flag on the RTG tank of the Viking lander with deep purple and yellow stripes, which was the result of red tweaking. So we had to tweak the colors on the flag until we had the American flag colors again." The lander that was released from the 1976 Viking 1 used a parachute to break the landing. Remember, so did the 97 Pathfinder. There must be a relatively dense atmosphere for a parachute to work, an atmosphere at least 75% of the Earth's. On July 21st, 1976, the first color photograph of the Martian surface from the first Viking lander appeared on the front page of the San Diego Union. The headlines read, "Planet boasts blue sky." The picture was more than aesthetic. It looked just like the sky on Earth and strongly proved that the Martian atmosphere diffused sunlight the same as our earthly sky. The picture was retracted the next day by NASA as a false image, and every picture released from that point on has been altered with red tones. Mission Control reported for 3 days that ground fog was present at the site every morning, but again these reports were soon censored and changed. The Viking lander also detected nitrogen in the Martian atmosphere, an element believed to be a necessary ingredient for life. The Viking orbiter determined the northern polar ice cap on Mars to be 20 miles thick, and that both the polar ice cap stored enough water to cover the whole planet to a depth of 20 feet should it thaw out. It also photographed many regions that were covered with frost and snow. The truth is that the government space agency, and remember that NASA is just such an agency, has been involved in the largest and most massive cover-up of all times. They have been covering up solid evidence of other life, past and present, out there in this solar system of ours. These photographs were taken recently by one of the new orbiters that is currently operating around Mars. Some of the very few color photographs released publicly. Taken on the edge of the Martian North Pole, we can clearly see wind-driven snow contrasted against wind-driven sand. Very striking images of the Martian environment. Here is a photograph of the high Andes, taken by a satellite above Chile. If we were to batch these photographs up, it would be hard to tell which ones were from Earth and which ones were from Mars. Herein lies another major clue to the ultimate cover-up being perpetrated by NASA. They don't dare show us close-ups of the more temperate regions of Mars. They always release red-toned or gray-toned pictures from areas of the planet that are frozen in winter. They never show us a close-up of the Martian summer at, say, 35 degrees north latitude. The truth is that Mars was once inhabited by humanoid beings, possibly our own ancestors. Our government and NASA know this, and that is why they will not release the high-resolution photos now being taken by very sophisticated photographic orbiters that have been in operation around Mars for over 3 years. More and more evidence is amassing which suggests that Mars had abundant forests and an oxygen-rich atmosphere. It appears that the forests were destroyed and that the atmosphere was pumped full of carbon dioxide, the same process that is happening right now on Earth. It is important to realize that drastic environmental changes can come in 1 century and perhaps even 1 decade or less. The collapse of our atmosphere could cause an ice age that could freeze our oceans over in 2 weeks. The winds would then blow around the planet, spreading dust and soil from eroding mountains and barren, deforested wastelands. In a very short time, Earth could be very much like Mars, desolate with the spoils of war and destruction scattered around in the rocks and sand, layered over frozen oceans and lakes. We must end the destructive practice of burning fossil fuels. We must stop the pumping of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere. There is a place on our own planet that has already suffered an environmental collapse and may well be a potent omen for all of humanity. That place is Easter Island. Easter Island is the world's most isolated chunk of land. It sits like a planet in space, but as an island of 64 square miles in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, with the nearest inhabited land being over 1,400 miles away. Its latitude is 27 degrees south, which gives it a mild climate, and its volcanic-rich soil, in all probability, should render the island a rich paradise. But today, the island is nothing more than a barren wasteland with withered grass and stunted vegetation, shadowed by massive and mysterious stone faces, staring out into the eternal sea, much like the stone face on Mars stares out into the depths of the universe. For the islanders that were left when Easter Island was first discovered by Jacob Roggeveen on April 5, 1722, hence the name Easter, all that was left of their native animals were insects. There was not even 1 species of land birds, bats, snails, or lizards. What happened on Easter Island? How did a culture create and transport massive stone sculptures weighing up to 85 tons and in some cases up to 500 feet long on a diet of grasses and insects? Roggeveen was awestruck as he could not figure out how this isolated culture, which only had a few flimsy leaky rafts of no more than 10 feet in length, could have left such monuments with no heavy timber, machines, or a rope to move and erect them. Not until scientists began to excavate and examine the layers of past island culture, looking specifically at the pollen deposits and food dumps, did a clear picture of Easter Island's history emerge. The massive task of identifying and dating pollen was undertaken by John Flintley, now at Massa University in New Zealand, and Sarah King of the University of Hull in England. Flintley and King uncovered a striking and startling new picture of Easter Island, and a dire message that humanity needs to heed. For at least 30,000 years before humans arrived, and during the early years after human arrival, pollen deposits at the deeper strata levels revealed that the island was once a subtropical forest of towering trees, which hovered over lush ferns, flowers, fuel trees, and huaha trees, which furnish rope. In fact, these early layers were so packed with tree and plant pollen that few places on the planet today could compare with the paradise the island once was. They found vast amounts of pollen from an Easter Island palm tree, closely matched to the palm trees in South America, which yielded edible nuts and valuable sap that was made into sugar, syrup, honey, and wine. The wood from these palms was perfect for the construction of large canoes. By examining the garbage pits of the early inhabitants of Easter Island, it was easy for the researchers to determine what they ate. Unlike the food remains of other more tropical Polynesian cultures, porpoises were a main staple, accounting for over 1/3 of all the animal bones found in the ancient garbage dumps of Easter Island, as shore fishing was never good off the cliff-laden island. The one-time rich island culture had mastered the craft of seaworthy canoe construction and built a whole society around the massive island palms. But other than porpoises, mammals, abundant seabirds, tropical birds, owls, and other smaller forest animals dressed a rich diet of fruits, nuts, sugars, and oils. Pollen records in layers of soil, as well as the bones found in garbage dumps, yield a grim picture to what happened next. With such a rich and abundant lifestyle at first, the Easter Island culture flourished and expanded to around 20,000 people who developed a very complex and magnificent society. They felled the giant trees to build canoes, build houses, and move the giant stone statues that the now wealthy class rulers were building to honor themselves and their clans. The statues got larger and larger while the destruction of the forest intensified. More and more trees had to be cut to support both the canoe sea hunting needs of a giant workforce in the quarries, as well as the timbers needed to move the massive stones. Pollen records reveal that the trees got smaller and smaller as they could not regenerate fast enough to supply the lavish needs of a population that had come to value material wealth and ever larger symbols of power as rival clans struggled to surpass each other. As the forest disappeared, So did all the animals and birds. So did all the food, canoe and rope-producing trees and plants. Without the forest, springs and freshwater ponds dried up. The bones left in successive garbage dumps reveal that the islanders ate smaller and smaller animals and birds. But by 1500 AD, the large trees were all gone, and the natives could no longer build canoes to hunt porpoises. Soon the bones of rats appeared in the food dumps, and then the bones of each other. Yes, cannibalism replaced part of the lost diets. Preserved statuettes from this time period with sunken cheeks and visible ribs tell the story of a starving people. In more recent food dumps, chewed bones of human beings lay scattered above the other layers that tell a chilling story of environmental destruction. The people of Easter Island had literally consumed every last thing that was edible. None of the plants and trees could regenerate due to the changed ecosystem and the lack of any seed bank. The rats and small rodents that competed with the islanders in the inn for food had eaten and destroyed the remaining seeds and pods. Even the last hardy root plants had been dug up and devoured. With the disappearance of food surpluses, Easter Island could no longer feed the chiefs, bureaucrats, and priests who had kept the complex society running. Surviving islanders described to early visitors how local chaos replaced centralized government and how a warrior class took over. Thousands of stone spears and daggers made by the warriors in the 16 and 1700s still litter the ground of Easter Island. By around 1700, people took to living in caves for protection against their enemies, and by 1770, 50 years after the island was discovered, rival clans started to topple each other's statues, breaking the heads and royal crowns off. It has only been in recent centuries that some of the stone faces have been repositioned upright. Today, the bleak landscape looks much like the planet Mars, with the massive humanoid face staring blankly into the cameras of human explorers. We don't need to go to Mars to explore the future of humanity. We will only find a grim picture of the past, a planet-sized wasteland left by a greedy and destructive race of beings, possibly our own ancestors. We can explore our past and potential future right here on this planet. The truth about Easter Island presents a chilling wake-up call to all of humanity. The truth about Mars, if ever uncovered, will do the same.
Hey,